team, and now that everyone is seated at the table who needs to be, I'll go ahead and start the proceedings here. I think we'll convene first as the Board of Health, because we have some special guests here, although before I have them come up, I thought maybe my students should introduce themselves to the board. We did it with the nursing students last time, so we might as well do it with the chemistry students today. So I recognize some of those faces. So just stand up and tell us your name and where you're from, and maybe what you're studying.
I'm Rachel Bachma. I'm going to school for dental hygiene, getting my associate science degree right now.
I'm Rose Joaquinin. I'm going for nursing. It's my second year.
Tyler Mink, pre-nursing too.
Hope Vaughn. I'm going back to PA school, and I'm from Missoula.
Okay.
So even though you claim them in chemistry, which is important, she gets to claim them too, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Well,
I actually, until you get through juniors, I don't know.
You don't think one will-
that's why they get extra credit for coming to the Board of Health, right?
Yeah.
Good.
No, they don't get extra, it's just clinical time. It's
Great.
They get hours.
So first I'd like to welcome some representatives from St. Patrick's Hospital. I'll have Ellen introduce them.
Yes, Joyce Dombrowski. Is this on?
It doesn't
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like it.
doesn't sound like it.
Joyce Dombrowski from St. Pat's Hospital is here with us, and she'll give you her title and when she comes up and speaks. And Joanne Hoven in Public Information from St. Pat's is also with us. We're working with a number of other people and divisions at the hospital, and also with other clinical settings. I'd like to introduce this topic a little bit, and then I will ask, just technically, then I will ask you to come up, and when you do come up, we have to play musical chairs with the microphone.
Okay. Very good.
So, and I thank them for coming on very short notice, and I thank Ed and Jean for suggesting that we make that invitation. Last month, we talked about the basics of Ebola virus disease. You might remember the journal report, and I'm saying some of this for the MCAT and the public audience. And we also mentioned some of our preparedness here. So what my plan was this month was to talk with you a little bit more about the rules and regulations, some of which will come into play, some of which may not, some of which we really don't know because we're still in planning stages in terms of anything operational other than public information. So the public information phase is certainly underway, and in fact it's been pushed, I would say, pretty dramatically by some of the national news. So while we expected that public information would be the first operational stage for us, I would say that that's become true. I want to show you are, first I want to remind you that this board has adopted and currently revised and readopted and reviewed a quarantine and isolation policy. I'm not going to go over that whole policy today. I do have it. I have it for reference as well as copies if we get into questions where any of us wish to review that or have Marnie take a look at that for us. The rules I'm showing you here, however, are promulgated at the state level in Montana. And so they are administrative rules of Montana, and what you have up there are excerpts. Just for easier viewing, they are excerpts. And they are the rules that have to do with reportable diseases and conditions. So Ebola is one, we see under the first rule there, and again it's been excerpted, but Ebola is one because it is a viral hemorrhagic fever, as we learned last month. The next is the transportation of communicable disease cases, and this has to do with bringing someone into a local jurisdiction, because again, Montana is decentralized for public health authorities, from one county to another with a communicable disease. So what currently happens, although this rule is quite old, it's still in effect. It's just not often or recently been used for a transport that is a little bit more exciting than some of the usual transport. So if we have in the state someone who has tuberculosis and is undergoing treatment for tuberculosis, and they happen to be residing in Butte, and they are going to be moving to Missoula, then what happens, as the law requires, is the state, that county, Butte, Silver Bow, Consolidated, needs to officially notify the state health department. The state health department notifies us. We all three end up working together. If that person is not hospitalized because they're in an inactive state, but they're still on medications and they need to be under observation and some level of care, that doesn't involve the hospital really in any way. We simply get the notification, we're prepared, we meet the person, we make sure they're still taking their medication, and we watch for symptoms. And if need be, if they regress and have to be hospitalized for any reason, then of course we work with the hospital. If the patient is being transported, let's say they're an active case, and they're in the hospital in Billings, and Billings got extra busy with something else that happened, and they need to do an inter-hospital transport in the state, which, and I'm going to look at Joyce here, I think happens hundreds, not necessarily TB cases.
There's a lot of between hospital transports.
There's a great deal of between hospital transports for any kind of condition, but in this case I'm using TB as a example. We would be notified by the local hospital and the state health department that they've accepted or are planning to accept an active TB case. And then we would, work with them and know that, but generally those contacts all live in another county and not in our jurisdiction. And we don't get involved in any deep way until such time that that person is discharged, okay? That's generally what this particular rule talks about, is to make sure both jurisdictions are satisfied that the notifications and the isolation precautions are in place for transfers between local public health jurisdictions. And then we have the quarantine of contacts, notice and observation. And again, quarantine is different than isolation. Quarantine is watching for symptoms among those who may be developing a disease and could become infectious. Isolation is primarily what we're talking about here when we talk about actually transporting an active case of any disease, whether it's TB or Ebola. If they're being transported, again, directly into a hospital, there's not a special permission needed, but I do have the ability, and I would say the responsibility, to make sure that the isolation procedures in the hospital are adequate. That's rarely necessary because of the advanced and sophisticated state of isolation procedures in both of our local hospitals, but we do consult regularly when there's a question or a concern. And we certainly consult in order to verify and report. The last rule is the one that is causing the greatest deal of public interest right now across the country, and that is the importation of disease. And it says no person who has a reportable disease for which subchapter 5, which is the communicable disease reported chapter, which prescribes isolation, may be brought into the boundaries of the state without prior notice to the department. In this case, that is the state health department. Okay, and approval by that department, not by the governor, but by that department, of measures to be taken within Montana to prevent disease transmission. So what is being drafted up here, what we've been talking with the state about and our local partners, is what criteria are being looked at. They haven't been finally adopted for this particular disease. Even though this particular disease requires less, I would say a lesser form and a more common form of isolation, it of course has the public concern and the fatality rate and so on and so forth that we all acknowledge. So we don't have in our country experience with this particular disease, but we do have experience with this type of isolation. Okay, so that plus our quarantine and isolation. There are other decisions and conversations taking place at federal levels, the Centers for Disease Control, the State Department and the Department of Defense. I cannot clarify for you how those three entities interact, who finally makes decisions. I'm certainly more familiar with the Centers for Disease Control, and I'm also aware that the State Department has visited the 4 places in the country that happen to have a care and isolation unit. I'm going to ask St. Pat's to talk with you more about the care and isolation unit in a minute and answer your questions about that. So that's where we are with the rules. Again, where we are right now, let me give you a broader picture of where we are as this department's preparation and response. We have sent out, and I will share with you afterwards, after we have a chance to hear from our guests, the decision trees for testing that are current from the Centers for Disease Control. They have been sent out by our usual Health Alert Network. Reminders of isolation precautions, screening tools for travelers for any clinician to use, including our own Partnership Health Center, which we've, touching base with again today to make sure they understand how and when to use those. We also have learned very recently that the State Health Department biological laboratory has been approved as one of the 15 laboratories approved by CDC in the country for Ebola virus confirmatory testing. So that's a nice resource, but also one that will bring more attention, and I think in some cases questions, but I see that as a really good resource. Those types of information are out there. I will admit that some of our easier and broader ways of getting that information out are sometimes temporarily sidelined because of the fact that we do have a potential for a transportation into Missoula by the State Department, CDC, or some level of the federal government because of St. Pat's Hospital's unit, which is actually there because and primarily for care of lab workers, should that care be needed, at Rocky Mountain Laboratory. So let's talk about that, and then we can come back for more questions and suggestions. So I would like to invite Joyce and Joanne to come up, and we'll need your name spelled for the record, please.
Certainly.
Thank you.
I think Joyce and I had daughters that were on the same song.
We absolutely did, yes. Don't age me. Just this year. So, Joyce Dombrowski, D-O-M-B-R-O-U-S-K-I. My official title, and I'm sorry if I have to look at my name tag, but it is unusual, Chief Acute Services Officer. That really is the accountability for the operations at St. Patrick Hospital. So I would want to begin by just saying thanks for the invitation to come and speak with you to the degree that I'm able. And just as important for me is to really have you be clear that our relationship with the health department always has been critical, is critical, but certainly is today as we prepare our communities and really our state. And preparation really is education and helping, I would say, our public and really even our providers understand the situation that we're in. And I'd say third, and probably just as important, this is the most rapidly moving event and information that I have experienced in my 30 years plus in leadership. So I'm very careful to say what I'm saying today at 12:32. And I'm saying this with all due seriousness, could in fact change by the end of the day. We have clearly seen that as a lead organization, and so I think that's really important for you to understand that piece. So I'm happy to do a little bit of background or answer questions. I'm sort of not quite sure what's most helpful, or
Background would be helpful.
okay.
Since we're learning about the unit.
Right. Well, you are not alone probably in maybe not knowing or appreciating the fact that we have had biocontainment or a care and isolation unit, so we call it a CIU. We just use that acronym. really since 2008. And why would we have one? We have one because of our relationship with our colleagues in Western Montana at Rocky Mountain Lab. We were approached by Rocky Mountain Lab previous to 2008 to consider and talk through what we might do as a community hospital to support the rare event of an exposed researcher or visitor. And it makes perfect sense in terms of preparedness and public health preparedness to have had that conversation and to create those practices and policies. So that was really the beginning. We continue to be committed to Rocky Mountain Lab. For those reasons, for a researcher or for a visitor, and we do have a contract with them as such. And that contract then states that we will work with them and that our biocontainment unit, or CIU, is a piece of the work with them. Certainly not the end-all be-all, but a piece of that. So, go ahead.
Can I interrupt with?
You bet.
Why did St. Pat's step up for this instead of Marcus Daly, which is
Great question.
much closer?
Great question. And now, as I recall, and I'm saying recall, the requirement from Rocky Mountain Lab was that the hospital had to be a certain distance away from the lab. And that made Marcus Daly really not even an option. Now, remember, that was 2007 and 2008, so I would be respectfully corrected if I could, if I found something different, but that's what and great question. So to that end, we have worked and continue to work with Rocky Mountain Lab to drill, just like a disaster drill that we have here, right? We drill for an exposed patient or visitor, and we do those drills twice a year. Part of our training and preparation of our clinical staff includes how you would safely care for a patient, keep yourself safe, keep the patient contained or isolated. So it's a wonderful resource that we have in this community, and again, I'm going to repeat myself, the relationship we have is with Rocky Mountain Lab, and that's how we intend to use that unit.
Mr. Childers.
So that was kind of what I was wondering, was whether you practiced the things, and clearly you do, and I expected you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Who all is involved? Are the police and fire, for instance, involved when you do
Great
these
question.
drills?
I don't know the answer to that. There is an answer, I don't know it. I do know internally it's our nursing staff and respiratory therapy staff and lab staff. I can't speak to outside of the hospital.
Seems important.
I do know that Bitterroot Fire, or the Bitterroot
Ambulance?
ambulance is involved in that.
I think Jean was next.
I just wondered, it seemed like another section that probably you do train is your janitorial staff.
Anyone that would have yeah, so I say internally, it's anyone that we've identified that may have a role to play in caring for a patient. And a role to play doesn't mean necessarily hands-on. A role is a support level role, right?
Teresa, who's next?
Hi, Tracy.
Hey.
My is not really a question as much of it as a comment. I have had nursing students in senior management positions with the staff at Rocky Mountain Labs and have been down there for tours from their environment and seen what the disaster response is, and know that there is indeed a plan about if there's an event, if there's an exposure, who is transported. It's very consistent with disaster planning in the event of. We learned more in this community after the train accident with the chlorine.
That's right. That's so
I mean,
right.
we were not prepared for that as a community-wide, and we have a better response now to an exposure to a toxic, life-threatening element, whether it's infectious or toxin, or chemical or whatever. It's the same process, and we have a process for that. I just feel like the disaster planning that we've stepped up to do in our community in the last several years has been really positive.
I think Ross had a question.
Yeah, you mentioned that that your unit's relationship is with Rocky Mountain Labs. and that that's how you expect to use the unit.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that any patients or victims or whatever that would be coming into the unit would be coming through Rocky Mountain Labs?
You know, I would be remiss to say I know exactly how they would come through. I really would. I don't even want to speculate. It's just that is the reason the unit exists, is to service those individuals.
And Rocky Mountain Labs is part of NIH.
Correct.
The National Institute of Health. Right?
Correct.
Debbie? Oh, right.
Hi, Joyce, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I think Ross is sort of getting to the key that's probably generated a lot of interest at St. Pat's. And I suspect that all the other isolation units are in relation to level 4 containment facilities.
I don't
around the
know that.
country.
I really don't know that, but.
Yeah, and it looks like those are the units that are being used to treat the very few cases that have been identified. So I guess it sounds like you guys haven't figured that out yet, but the concern is not Rocky Mountain Lab. I mean, I think the issue is really more cases in Dallas or New York City or wherever, and how are those cases going to be dealt with nationally? And based on the New York Times article yesterday, as well as George Reese's NPR national interview last night, Missoula really has a target sort of painted on it, and so does St. Pat's, which I'm sure you're wishing was not there right now, but here you are.
Right.
I mean, you've got to take on that level. So I guess in the form of a question, you're telling us that you don't really know yet whether or not Missoula is, in the eyes of the CDC or whoever else is in charge of this, a potential place. And I'm sure that the equipment is there to take care of these people, and certainly with Dr. Reese's visit and training and your preparation, you guys are probably one of the top spots in the country. But it sounds like you just don't know whether you're going to be a destination for those people.
We have not been asked to take a patient. We haven't been asked to take a patient, and we don't have a patient. So,
Right.
I mean,
No,
that's
I
the direct
understand that,
answer. I would let this board know that, as I think I'm really sort of hoping, I guess, that all hospitals, whether it's Anaconda or whether it's Kalispell or whether it's St. Pat's, have sort of reminded themselves of the importance of being prepared for the unanticipated patient. And that's honestly really where our preparedness efforts, I'm going to say, in the last even 7 to 10 days have ramped up into that realm. And that's really what the situation in Texas, I think, sort of did for at least us, is to say, we may have this unit and we may have a designation at some level that we either don't want or wish we didn't have, but the issue is really being prepared for the unanticipated patient. And so, I guess I would hope, and this is sort of, I never really know where all this crosses over with public health, but how does our state public health department work with all of the hospitals in Montana to have some level of readiness around that unanticipated patient, and that feels a little bit more onerous and almost harder than sort of being prepared for a phone call that you were sort of kind of expecting. And so we're working hard there, and we're trying to learn as much as we can from what occurred in Texas. We're not getting a whole lot of information, and it's tough. If I were sitting there thinking if I were in that hospital, that'd be a very difficult place to be in terms of sort of opening yourself up to perhaps they didn't follow exactly what they should have. And again, I don't know that, right? I know what you know. I don't have any other inside information. So I'm really, really, again, I'm really hoping that we can, as a community of Missoula and as really a community of the state of Montana, spend our efforts around the unanticipated. Dr. Reese said last night to a group of our physician leaders, you know, and he comes from a different perspective, right? I mean, he's seen it, he's lived it, he has an ID doc, but he shares that same concern. He just shares that concern with us, that it's I don't want to misstate him or misquote him, but he does believe that our efforts really need to be on the unanticipated patient, not just in the hospital. I heard someone say partnership today, right? Right? Yeah.
All of us have been on a plane in the last
well,
year.
Right, Teresa, we could really, right.
I mean, so I guess part of it, to me, it seems like we've been talking about potential risks of global-wide exposure for the last 10 years that I have been teaching, at least, and before that. And so you're right, all of us are at risk of whatever is sort of out there. And if you work in healthcare around sick people, you have signed up for a job that includes being around sick people.
And I might just respond if I could. And so an obligation, at least, I would say, speaking for St. Pat's, is that our staff safety is paramount, first priority. And what does that mean? That means training, education for our staff to be competent and confident in any number of diseases, right? I mean, so that's really our obligation, I think, to our employers. They signed up, but we are also an employer that takes it very seriously in terms of training, appropriate training, and very deliberate and repetitive. And that, I think we sort of have always known that. I might sort of reflect back to those of us who are old enough to remember the AIDS crisis.
Right.
Very, very similar. I mean, not the same, but similar in terms of fear and unknown. And so we had to spend a lot of time learning and training and being prepared. And so I don't want to say it's just like that, because we didn't have the internet back then. That's what someone said, you know, kind of the 24/7 news. And sort of the challenge with that, we didn't necessarily have to face that piece of it 30 years ago. But
Maybe Debbie has the next question, then we'll go to Jean.
It was about the isolation unit.
Uh-huh.
And the unit itself has one bed or multiple beds?
3 beds.
3 beds. Okay, so potential for perhaps 3 cases
So
to be
my
handled at
answer
once.
back is there's 3 beds, but caring for any patient who's been exposed to, you know, probably anything that RML is working on, it isn't just about the bed. It's about the staff, and it's about the staff's protective equipment. It's about running labs. It's about, do you have enough, do you have an autoclave to disinfect? Do you have a way to remove your waste? I mean, so I use that as a point of education, because it's really easy to go, 3 beds, 3 patients, and that's probably just not an accurate way to think of it. Is that okay?
Jean, Ross.
First, I'd just like to thank you for coming today. because
Sure.
As coming in, Ed and I were cornered on the street corner with someone who said the public deserves honest answers from, you know, the lead
Sure.
organization. So we are glad you are here.
Sure.
The other is, it seems to me in listening to you talk about the fact that we have this unit and that you do training for it, it feels to me like we're ahead of, I don't believe the hospital in Dallas was prepared for that.
Yeah.
As you said, we need to be prepared for the unanticipated. So I appreciate you coming, and I just feel confident that we are ahead of what happened in Dallas, and we have learned from what happened in Dallas.
Right. May I respond to that in that I appreciate that, and I believe our relationship and having that unit has put us in a level of preparedness that you know, might be ahead, but we got to. Our goal is to really get our other community hospitals in the state kind of right, because if you really think about it, and if we believe that, and again, I'm not a clinical expert at all on this, but if we believe that we collectively might have an unanticipated patient anywhere, our goal is, you know, and I'm say this kind of as a citizen, really want other places to get their preparedness. And I'm going to say to a higher level, that sort of assumes that I think they're not. I'm hoping that everyone is really quickly working towards that end.
But normally when somebody walks in with a 100-degree fever, doesn't necessarily mean they need to be rushed to a unit.
Yeah, and point well taken. Point well taken. I mean,
So-
we're going
so
into
you're
flu
right.
season
We
too,
have to
you know,
look
so
at
you
it.
kind of, I mean, it's just an interesting time. Right.
Ross.
So with the you mentioned with the 3 beds, is that an indication of the maximum capacity, or is there a contingency plan to expand the unit
Sure.
if need be?
Great question. So here's my answer, which is sort of coming around to it. Every hospital in the country has to be prepared to provide isolation for the person who walks in the door. Everybody. So that we have 3 beds or 150 beds at St. Pat's is sort of you got to come back around to, that's sort of not relevant, and I'm trying not to sound sort of pushback. What's relevant is identification and appropriate isolation of the patient from the moment they come in. And I can go back to Rocky Mountain Lab and the drills. Those are drills of anticipated patients, right? I mean, some of our drills were like, we'll have them there in 3 days. I mean, we're talking, and all that's fine and good, and we did that training, and I'm proud of that preparation, but really the focus is on, are we prepared to deal effectively with the unanticipated person? Sure, certainly, right. So does that,
Yeah.
I don't want to be, I just want to be.
Yeah, no, it's.
Yeah. Everyone gets real focused on those 3 beds. I mean, it just does. And my job today sort of is to pull us back and say there's sort of a broader focus
Are
here.
they double beds, king size? I was listening to a congressional hearing on this just before I came, and a question was this: should a mother worry when their child has fever? And the answer was yes, if you live in Western Africa. Other than that, probably not at this point. So that's good. But you were talking about a couple of things. One was coordination among all of the hospitals and other providers, and another was we're not quite sure who's doing what on that front. And my understanding in Missoula is that you guys are spearheading what's going on.
Oh, gosh.
So there you go. There's number
There you
one.
go.
And so some point needs to be trying to coordinate all of this stuff. And I did think I'd mention that having you guys in that ISO unit here in Missoula and the lab south of here probably puts us in better shape than almost anybody's. Good for you.
Well, terrific. I'll take that. I think what you would know living in Missoula is that there might be a sense that St. Pat's is taking the lead, but we happen to have a skill set around an anticipated patient. But again, I was talking to Ellen before the meeting. I mean, we do as much as we can in concert with every resource, right, in this community, city, county health department, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to sort of like take the lead because we know we can and we're best at it. And yet there are times where perhaps a body of knowledge that we currently have might make some sense for us to take the lead. But I would never say, and this sort of sounds a little Pollyannish, I mean, it really is a team effort. It really is and has to be a team effort. And that's what I've appreciated with working with Ellen way before this crisis in terms of disaster preparedness or, post 911 work or all the things that every flu season, new bug, everything we've worked on has to be, well, who's doing what and how do we not be redundant and step on each other's toes? Be respectful of the regulatory side of which we rely on Ellen and her team to help us. And at the same time know that we happen to have some people who have clinical expertise that we could bring to bear. So I'm not trying to be, we're not the lead, we don't want to be the lead, but we do work through who has the right information at the time to do what in a very collegial way. I'm not sure that happens everywhere, but I don't really care. Right now, that's how it happens in Missoula, and I've known Ellen for a long time, and she knows, I mean, that may not be a right systems approach, but relationally, that's how it's working.
It almost sounds right, and it would sound better if I knew that there was a time and place when all of the interested parties merged together to do this.
I'd say we're sort of doing that daily by email, by, I wouldn't sort of say that's how we're doing it right now because it is ever changing. I'm not sure we could meet every Monday at 9, and really be very effective as a team, but we're using that internet to our advantage to share information and responsibilities. And I don't know, Ellen, if there's anything else you want to add to that, but I'll speak for you.
Yes, excuse me.
Oh, please.
I want to take your.
No,
seat,
I'm
but
done.
sure
I'm
you're
really,
okay
I'm really
giving
glad to
it
be
up.
done. That seat was very hot. No.
When you actually, at the risk of getting too technical for the public, but for things that the board does understand, and that for folks at St. Pat's understand, is the incident command system does work, not just when you've actually got something unrolling, but as in a planning tool. So St. Pat's, in terms of, as I've been told by my colleagues that work not at Joyce's level, but with Joyce and us, they have been preparing in a particular way because of the care and isolation unit, but not exclusively in that way. They have also been preparing for the unidentified patient, the unknown patient, which, as Joyce correctly says, could happen at any time. And then, of course, they must always be prepared for the Rocky Mountain Lab obligation. Okay, so they really have three ways. So if a transport, for example, whether it's the State Department or the Feds or the CDC, it still would have to be, a decision would have to be, they may make the decision that they would like to use that resource, but St. Pat's Hospital would have to say, wow, well, we have the staffing right now, or we don't. Because staffing shifts every day. Acuity levels shift every day. If that incident were to occur, though, when I use the word lead, that's more when you actually go into the incident command system, and the agency who has that, the main operational activity becomes the lead, and then we all support. That's not general community leadership. We share that. Where we should have the lead is anytime there's a report or a need for preparation, including not just either of our hospitals, but all our clinicians, that's where we would have the lead. So what we usually use is our health emergency advisory team format. I did say earlier, and I want to emphasize, that nothing comes free, and the fact that Missoula has this additional resource, and I believe the resource is much more in the nursing staff and the healthcare staff than the fact that there is a place to put people that is kind of similar to some other places in all hospitals that doesn't even require this level of capacity for Ebola like it would for SARS or TB. Okay, having that is great. It doesn't come free because it has understandably gotten the media and the public focus for this very unfocused fear, and now they have a place to focus it. I understand that. I respect that. We're trying to respond to that. But it has been difficult to look at and prepare for the less easily identifiable scenario. That, I think, is a big part of what we're all struggling with. So we could be very ready to transport, and in fact, I've had this question asked of me 20 times. There is a thing called an isolette that actually lives in Hamilton. It's already been identified. Should this occur with a transport, that they will use it. They've drilled with it. Your staff's up to speed on that. Talk to local ambulance. Those kinds of things are happening. We just don't know if that's ever going to be put to use. But while we're spending our time doing that, we're concerned, as Joyce has stated, how to keep looking for the unknowns.
Just for clarification to the public, transport from somewhere else in the country to our places through a medical fixed wing aircraft, not.
Well, I don't know if it's fixed wing, but it is private. It is, if it were for that unique scenario that we're focused on, that we again don't know if it'll happen, but okay, that transport where the federal government is asking the state, and in turn asking St. Pat's Hospital, will you accept a patient that we as the U.S. government wants to bring back to help with their care and their isolation? That would be done by a private aircraft, whatever equipment, I have to say, I don't understand one from the other, but private aircraft commissioned by the federal government for that purpose. There's no chance in that pre-planned unusual event that is happening in the 3 other units that we know of, all of which are larger municipalities. There's no plan that would be anything other than private commission.
And then just to be clear, that isolate unit can slide in the ambulance to get them from the airport to the facility.
Yes, I mean, I could show you a picture of it, and I actually,
So that when they
You don't
come
wanna
to
be
get
in
grandma
it.
later, you're in the same plane.
but it is truly an isolate. I mean, it looks like something out of a movie.
Being cognizant of the time, I see it's close to 1 o'clock.
Mhm.
Wondered if Joyce had any
Joanne.
last comments you'd like to make, or any questions for us?
I just appreciate Ellen's sort of further explanation in terms of, while we're focused on this one side, really our preparedness for the unexpected continues to be really, I think, kind of the issue at hand that health leaders in the community have to really.
Well, we really appreciate you being here.
Certainly.
And
Thank
I know the degree to which there's the local buzz about this.
Yes.
I'm the faculty advisor for student government, and last night at the meeting, I heard one report of Missoula just got an Ebola patient. Another one was saying, why the heck does Missoula have one of the 4 units in the country?
Right.
What is it?
Right,
So-
now you know. Now you know.
Well, I knew before, but
Yeah.
that's the sort of buzz that I hear just among the general population.
Understood.
So we really know
Absolutely.
what you're up
Thank you for
against.
the
and appreciate
opportunity.
it.
Right.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, and thank you, Joanne, as
Yeah.
well.
Thank you.
We're talking very soon.
Probably at 3.
Again, yes. I know we've spent a great deal of time here, but I just want to give you a quick look, not an in-depth look, if the agenda could still allow it, on some of the other materials, because I think, I won't go over them, but I think it's helpful for you and the public to get a sense, one of the most, of what is out and available, and how recently this has been updated. So there was a conference call yesterday, a statewide conference call. So Ed, when you say someone, kind of ties it all together, the state health department and the localities all do, in not a simplistic fashion, but it gets tied together. Our hospital systems, though, are privately owned and operated.
Right.
So that whole issue of how then do we tie each other together really has to happen a great deal at the local level. So whenever there's a new or emerging infectious disease, we develop, and in this case CDC develops for us a case definition. And that definition helps anyone from the point of screening identify, is this someone that I should be thinking about this? And even if I don't know it's this disease, should I be isolating them, and so on and so forth? Should I be testing them? Who should I be notifying, and who can I ask? So a case definition is very important. This is the latest one, and you can see there's various levels to it. We hear in the media there's suspect cases. Well, that's okay to say to the public, it's a suspect case. But when you see the sort of the strata here, it starts with person under investigation. That's not a suspect Ebola case. It truly isn't. We don't even know if that person's going to be tested yet. But what we know, and what the nursing staff knows, is that person, when they walk into the ER, that clinical needs to be isolated. Just the same way as a kid. You don't think of measles anymore? But if you got a kid with a rash and a fever, that kid needs to be isolated while that physician is figuring out what it is. So that's where those become important. You can have that happen and never have a test. Similarly, you then have an algorithm that helps determine if the clinician, if they should test or not.
Can you put that bigger perspective?
Yes.
Where the number is? Yeah.
Okay? These are updated. This was updated again, and this helps the clinicians. These all go out through the health alert. We don't trust that it just goes through the health alert. We visit or have heat team meetings. We are, frankly, challenged right now to get into that broader circle because of all this particular focus. And that's the part that's been difficult for all.
I'm not sure what broader circle you mean, communication?
Yeah, our
Okay.
health emergency advisory team, all our clinicians in the community. We don't just send these out. We want to follow up. We want to get people on the phone. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And those are the kinds of things that that have been in competition with all the other media requests.
If I could add that all of these documents that Ellen is pulling up right now are also available on the CDC website for the general public, for anyone that wants them. We are collecting those documents and sending them out as HON messages to our clinicians and facilities, but they are available to everyone on the CDC website.
And I'll just show you one more. I won't go into all these, but there's one for how to contain, provide isolation for travel. That exists as well. It's not going to be enough for someone who's actually going to do it, such as if you did it in the way that in those 4 particular units. But it's a start and helps answer questions. What we are working on, and I actually thought we could have up to date, but we are awaiting, I think, some important input from infectious disease docs, is our own FAQ for our website. And we built this on Basic Ebola 101, but we also then added, and this is under Cindy's guidance, and then our internal PIOs have been activated. We also built it on the frequently asked questions and the evaluation of the phone call service that was set up in Omaha, Nebraska by the health department that is situated in the jurisdiction where Omaha has accepted the patients into a care and isolation unit. So ours has all those different levels. That is, frankly, has slowed down our ability to get it out as quickly. We need more review. So those are the types of things that are going on. And I really appreciate the St. Pat's coming and the board involvement and the extra time to review this with you.
If I could just add one more thing, the new 911 Emergency Operations Center in the basement of the courthouse annex is also set up. We've done it in the past, but at least we have a great space now to set up a call center. If we end up with someone from the Rocky Mountain Lab who is anticipated or someone who is unanticipated, just to answer public questions.
Right. And we met with 911 Monday, and we have a decision that's been made that we would have at least a temporary period of time where we would do a call center in conjunction with St. Pat's. They would have the call center, we would have the call center if in fact the CIU was used, but we can also use that similar plan if we get a suspect case, for example. And then I also want to mention.
Did you want to show us a picture of the isolab, I think?
I don't have it here. I'll send you one.
Okay.
Like I said, you don't want to be in it. Yeah.
That's my son last night.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there's everything down to checklists for clinicians to use.
I just have one final question going back to the ARMs. If I was to understand that correctly, that it's the department that would make a decision in this jurisdiction for quarantine of potential contact people with.
So if we had a case that became a suspect and then in fact an affirmed Ebola case, could we use that scenario to answer your question? Yes. And your very own quarantine and isolation policy, which we actually use case by case for other diseases such as pertussis, covers all the legal steps, including the due process, appeals, all of things that would happen, how the notification would happen. But then it is up to the health officer's judgment about how stringently that is followed. So generally, we at least check in with people we put under quarantine. If we were to have someone under quarantine for Ebola, we would be much more present in terms of making sure that that quarantine was being followed.
I might ask if there are any questions from the audience before we move back to our regular agenda. Great.
Thanks.
So maybe we'll adjourn from our Ebola session from the Health Board and convene now as the Water Quality District Board. We don't have September minutes yet to review. I see Peter approaching the microphone to give us an update on the Water Quality Advisory Council.
Peter Nielsen, Water Quality District. Water Quality Advisory Council met this month and discussed the proposed regulations proposed by the United States Environmental Protection Agency and Corps of Engineers to implement the Clean Water Act, Federal Clean Water Act. And the council decided to send comments, which have been provided to you, and also asked that the board consider sending the same comments, which has been prepared for you. And I guess we'll get into that when you're ready, if you're ready to go through that now. That's basically what we did at the meeting.
That's your update, then we'll move to the next
Yeah.
agenda item, which is an action item on the proposed joint letter from the Water Quality District and the Health Board.
So this was a complex subject, and one which takes a lot of time for many groups to get through. And it's also one that has been somewhat politicized recently and has received a fair bit of misinformation on both sides probably, but certainly on the sides opposing the regulation. So the council waded through all of that, and I would say that there was strong support on the council for returning much of the protection for headwater streams and wetlands that existed under the Clean Water Act for more than 30 years prior to the two recent Supreme Court decisions which clouded the waters quite a bit. There was some concern on behalf of probably two of the council members that the efforts to clarify it were not clear enough in terms of what actually is a documented connection or nexus between federal waters and those wetlands which may be connected through subsurface connections, groundwater, and so forth. So there were some folks that felt that was, a couple folks that felt that was unclear. I think it's also fair to say there were several folks on the council who felt that this did not restore enough of the protections that existed prior to the Supreme Court decisions in 2001 and 2006. The EPA, as you know, proposed these regulations 3 years ago. The council and the board and the county commissioners all commented on those proposed regulations 3 years ago. It has been fairly politicized since that time. They've come back and tried it again. It remains fairly politicized. EPA has attempted to expand the list of exemptions to regulation in order to mollify some of those concerns. And for example, they have completely exempted any agricultural activities from regulation. They extended exemptions that existed before for ditches that carry waters, but are not natural streams. There's a whole list of exemptions, and some folks felt that those just went too far. Other folks felt that they didn't. So we had quite a bit of discussion about that. And what we ended up with was a general letter of support for efforts to protect wetlands and intermittent streams that previously were regulated since 1972 under the Clean Water Act, and stating how important those resources are in Missoula County, in areas like the Swan Valley, which is just full of wetlands, and the Blackfoot, and 9 Mile Creek, and Willow Creek, and you name it. And all these headwater streams are very important to not only biological communities and streams downstream, but to drinking water supplies, so they affect public health as well.
The wetlands is one of the best water treatment systems you've got.
Absolutely, and of course they also provide a great deal of attenuation of floodwaters and storage, which is going to be increasingly important in the future if our climate continues to change in the pattern that it appears to be doing so, where we have earlier spring runoffs and diminished flows in the summer. So these things are important to our community, and the council endorsed restoration of meaningful enforcement of the Clean Water Act in Missoula County. They did, however, insert a sentence into the letter that they believe the proposed regulations need some additional work to address the significant connection issue, the significant nexus issue between intermittent streams and year-round streams, wetlands and year-round streams, so forth. And that was largely, as I said, due to the concerns expressed by two of the council members. Others felt that that connection was very clearly demonstrated, myself included, but that was a compromise in the letter, and also in recognition that EPA is likely to need to put some extra work into this anyway. So it was a positive letter of support for it from the council. They recommended that the board and also have forwarded this to the county commissioners for your consideration, Commissioner Curtis, to express a positive support for protection of these water bodies. And just to clarify, for those who aren't familiar, what this is all about is clean water jurisdiction for streams pertaining to activities known as dredge and fill activities. Those where you have activities, construction activities that occur in streams or wetlands where you dredge material or you fill those water bodies. And that is one aspect of Clean Water Act regulation. It's not groundwater regulation, which is addressed under different parts of the code. In the state of Montana, groundwater regulation, surface water regulation for discharge permits, the state of Montana has primacy for those activities from the EPA, and those don't change. This has to do with dredge and fill for wetlands, intermittent streams, and so forth that are connected to navigable waters of the U.S. So that's the recommendation of the council. I'd be happy to answer any questions. It could take a lot of time on it.
So what do you mean by the sentence, restoration of meaningful enforcement? Who do you want to come and enforce? I don't understand that sentence. What it means is that for more than 30 years, under the Federal Clean Water Act, virtually all natural surface waters of the United States were recognized and defined as waters of the U.S. The two Supreme Court cases in 2001, 2006 clouded the water and created great uncertainty. There's been quite a few projects that should have been regulated in Missoula County and in Montana throughout the country, but have not been regulated. Can you give an example?
There's one up in the Swan. I can't remember the name of it, but it was listed in a report that I presented to you 3 years ago that was prepared by the Montana Council of Toronto Limited, and it was a wetland area that previously would have been jurisdictional, would have required a permit, and what this is a permit, Section 404 permit. It's one of the several permits that are required for activities along streams and wetlands. And in this case, it was not regulated under that permit. Other permits that are handled in Montana, these are all handled under one joint application. Our floodplain permit is one of those. The 310 permit for the Conservation District is another, and the 404 permit from the Army Corps is what we're talking about here for dredge and fill. Sorry, I can't remember the name of that lake or that wetland.
Okay.
I can get that to you, though.
I had the joy of listening to the National Association of Counties belittle this legislation for about an hour at the MACO conference. To me, it was just fear-mongering, but the National Association of Counties, the Montana Association of Counties are taking a strong stand against it because they feel that all of it affects roads, streets, and ditches. And you can't convince them different by showing what it says on EPA and the Corps of Engineers site. So you're saying that ditches, and to me ditches means a lot of different things. It can mean a borrow pit, it can mean an irrigation ditch. You're saying ditches has now been exempted?
Ditches have been exempted. They were, many ditches were exempted previously. I'm going to actually try to find the EPA's response to that while I'm paging through this. I may not find it real quickly, but EPA actually has proposed to extend the exemption for ditches in these rules so that prior to what
I'm not saying
existed.
that Missoula County signed on to the Montana Association of Counties opinion. I'm just telling you that's.
Yeah.
And we did, the commissioners met with Tracy Stone Manning a couple of weeks ago, and the Montana Department of Environmental Quality does not feel that this will be too restrictive. They also said that Montana already has some rules that are stricter than the Clean Water Act now that they enforce. So I think the biggest fear being spread out there is that somehow the runoff from rain into a borrow pit is somehow now going to be monitored by the EPA. And I think that it's probably just more if you have a project in the borrow pit. But you might have some opinion, since I know your company does this kind of work.
Yeah, I think it goes to this significant connection issue. I think that there is some concern from developers that they're, what's done now is the calculated runoff pre-development and post-development has to be retained on site, and so, but that water potentially that has connection to wetlands, surface water, others. If you put it into a dry well, you're going to assume that it's going to filter out through the soil and eventually enter the aquifer. So that, connection issue is the piece that is very confusing and doesn't sit well with everyone. So I think that, Peter, you kind of say it in the letter that everyone's confused about the connection.
Still, there's quite a bit of discussion on that, and I think they're going to need to do some more. They're going to need to do some more work on that.
That's exactly what this letter is requesting.
And there's a divergence of opinion on that.
Right.
I think it's fairly clear hydrologically, personally, but that's me.
Yeah, but you're looking at it from a different angle. I mean, to you, it sounds good, but I really wonder whether that significant connection issue should actually refer to such as development and road construction retention, in that connection. Because I think that piece is the piece that scares people, and they need to help us not feel like that.
So that's actually those are two different things, actually, but what it is the connection issue has to do with determining what's jurisdictional. Right? So the roads issue, ditches issues, those are exemptions. So this rule for the first time exempts all ditches that are constructed through dry lands and don't have water year-round. So actually, this rule reduces the number of ditches regulated that were regulated previously. And it exempts all agricultural activity. But the connection issue is where people are stumbling on it, and it's and Ross, you're trained as a hydrologist, and it may be more clear to someone like you who understands how we determine that a wetland is connected to surface water because there's groundwater flow between them. But other folks are having difficulty with that.
Well, I was thinking of it more from the legal perspective. The significant connection, isn't that pretty much the whole crux of the issue? I mean, isn't that what the case law was determined on? So the clarification of significant connection is the crux, isn't it? So,
Yeah, that's why they have to do it.
right, so how could we take it out? That's the issue.
They're going to have to do some more work on this.
Yeah, right. But that's the issue to be clarified, because that's.
Well, that and what they exempt.
Yeah, because the whole, what was a significant connection is what was altered in the 2001 and 2006 cases.
That was what was made unclear.
Right.
And so what the Supreme Court and Congress actually asked EPA to do was to clarify it.
Yeah.
And they're attempting to clarify it. And they haven't gotten quite far enough to clarify it to everyone's satisfaction.
So do we want to leave that statement in as it is, or do we want to put more emphasis in the need?
Or do you have a different way to word it?
Yeah, to me, it kind of needs to be in there if to satisfy the, some of the concerns that have been raised to you, if there need to add in some of the exemptions that, recognizing, continue the sense with recognizing the exemptions of
I think what's missing from a lot of the county's comments on this is an expression of their recognition of the importance of protecting these wetlands and streams. And so that's what this would.
But in reality, if we already have a road that's built and goes through a wetland, we're already polluting the waters.
But we don't need a permit for an existing.
Right, so that isn't really protecting it either.
No, what this is for projects looking forward. It's for construction projects that would involve dredging or filling.
Yeah, there's a significant one right now on the Post Creek Hill between, St. Ignatius and Pavel. I mean, that's a wetland the whole way that was created, by the road fill and the Borough Ditch adjacent, and a lot of natural ones at Mine Pipes and such, but, this is important, and I don't think people know exactly what to do.
We have cattails growing along the road on the expressway in the development park out by the airport. And I think that was a dry hayfield when it started. I don't think that you have any better words.
So are you proposing, I'm still not clear on this. Are you still working on editing this letter?
I haven't got an edit in my head.
I guess my only input was that I don't know how we could take significant connection out.
Sort of a one-sentence paragraph there, does it need more emphasis?
But was it that, or was it the next sentence that you were, the meaningful enforcement piece?
Well, I was just asking what they meant by that. I guess it's because they didn't have to get a 404 permit, they now would. So I understand.
Right.
And I guess, so I'm comfortable with the letter the way it is, but it seems like if there are some concerns, is there language that we can add to it to address those concerns? As opposed to taking this letter and potentially at risk of weakening this letter.
Yeah?
So I'm fine with it the way it is. I'd be willing to make a motion to, I guess, approve it and send it.
But it would be good if we work at trying to hear back what is evolving as far as clarifying the significant connection goes.
I bet we'll be talking about it again in another
Right.
year or two.
In terms, Peter, of the evolution of this rule, that's still what we think, that we're a couple years out?
I think EPA will have to, given the volume and the nature of comment, that they'll have to go and do some more reevaluation. I bet they propose another rulemaking.
So maybe along with approving the letter, we can.
But I could be wrong on that. Maybe they'll proceed with it and make changes, but they're going to have to do some work on it nonetheless. I'm sorry.
So besides approving the letter and authorizing me to sign it, task the Water Quality Advisory Council with continuing to follow the clarification of significant connection issue. That sounds like a good idea.
So, Yeah, that's a fine idea. I suspect we don't need to do that, but I'm fine with putting it in.
Okay. Any comment from the public before we take an action? Tyler, do you have anything to say?
Thanks.
Okay. Anything else? All those then in favor of approving the letter and authorizing me to sign it as drafted, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. I will sign them at the conclusion of the meeting and give them to Julie. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
The only other things we have for the water quality district are opportunity for the public to comment on any water issue that isn't on the agenda. Anyone out there want to talk about any water issue that isn't on the agenda? Seeing none, we also offer the same opportunity to board and staff members.
I have some advisory council appointment letters for you if you're prepared to make them.
I can do that. I saw that email. I also want to tell you that the students were very appreciative in the rapid return of the hours that they contributed to the Has Waste Days.
Oh, good, yeah, and thanks for the students that participated. Your chemistry students are really great.
Yeah.
They're really, really good to have.
It was
help us
so
with that event.
affirming to them to have the letter come back that I could put on the projector and they could see the thank you and
Oh, good.
allow me to put the points in.
It was very successful, and once again, we collected a lot of waste, and nobody got hurt. A little bit, volume a little bit down this year from last year, but not tremendously. And no really oddball, weird, big loads of junk coming in. It seems like we must have cleared out most of the bad ones, but there was a lot of folks, the home sales have picked up, I can tell. A lot of people showing up saying, oh yeah, I just bought this house and left all this stuff in the garage. I must have heard that 200 times. So thanks for the students. They really do a great job for us.
Great. Hey, you leave those with me, I'll sign them and bring them by your office.
Yeah, I'll this out.
So with nothing more for the Water Quality District Board, we'll adjourn from that and reconvene as the Board of Health again. We don't have September minutes prepared for review yet, so first thing on the agenda is action on the proposed joint letter from the Water Quality District and the Health Board, so we have to do that as both boards.
You should do, please.
Okay. With comments on the proposed Clean Water Act regulations. We've already discussed this. Anybody want to make the same motion?
I'll make the same motion.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we've done that. I just didn't look down, I started reading through and I said, this looks like deja vu.
Over again.
And now we have a journal report from Teresa.
I don't know if you all got printed copies, some people did. Brings me great joy to talk about primary care and pediatric fluoride again. Kind of entertaining.
She waited till you
I waited till you were done. I'm sorry that.
You put it off while I was gone?
The pre-nursing and pre-dental hygiene. This journal article came from the Maternal Child Health Advisory Council meeting. We were talking about it because Heidi Helmerson is like on a mission to help us do something about dental caries in small children. The reason I thought it was interesting that it's fluoride use in caries prevention in primary care settings. I'm less about the adamant discussion of who should or shouldn't apply, but more what I really like about this article is it gives you directions about if you're trying to teach a little kid how to brush their teeth and how much toothpaste you should use. So it starts out with saying that dental caries is an infectious disease, and it goes because the acid's produced by bacteria, and if it's not halted, then it will continue through the tooth. The failure to prevent caries has health, education, and financial consequences to both individual and society. And caries, that's the other word for cavities, is the silent epidemic that disproportionately affects poor, young, and minority populations. Because many children don't receive dental care at a young age and risk factors for dental caries are influenced by parenting practices, pediatricians have a unique opportunity to participate in the primary prevention. The studies show that simple home and primary care setting preventive measures could save healthcare dollars. So from that point of view, I think the idea of, it does give you some good information about fluoride and the risks of overdose with fluorosis. You'd have to have a fair amount. Actually, your kid would have to probably eat a lot more of that toothpaste along with having fluoridated water that you were using. So what is fun for me to share is that the description of using fluoride toothpaste that starts on the next page. We'll come back and talk about that table in just a second. So it talks about in the first column, partway down under fluoride toothpaste, where it says that gives a description of the fluoride concentration in over-the-counter toothpaste. So a pea-sized amount of toothpaste is approximately 1/4 of an inch, and a pea-sized amount of toothpaste has enough fluoride in it for a regular dose. But if you have a tiny child, like using the next column, use of fluoride toothpaste should begin with the eruption of the first tooth. And if you move down farther, it says it's recommended that the amount be limited to a smear or a grain of rice size, about 1/2 the size of a pea, which is back to don't let little kids put their toothpaste.
They just like the squeeze.
Yeah,
the squeeze.
The bottom line is, you don't let the little kid put the toothpaste on the toothbrush themselves, and don't give them water to drink afterwards to swish and spit, because little kids will swallow as soon as they put it in your mouth. So you should teach them about the spitting part until they're probably over 6. I'm concisely giving this report here just because those are the things that I thought were more important. So you could you could teach people, or if you're doing parenting classes and talking more to, because I get, just as a nurse, and I'm not in pediatrics, I'm not in primary care anymore, but people say, well, what about this? They ask me all kinds of weird questions. And now I have a thing that I can say. Well, I only need a pea-sized amount of toothpaste. That's a good thing to know, because people in America especially think if a teaspoon is good, a tablespoon is better.
Well, those commercials always show you putting a big ball of
Yeah,
meat
with a swirl in it. Yeah,
That's right,
Everybody's got that
Exactly.
implanted, that's.
So you can do that, and then you go whack and lost that in the
Well,
foot and
it's
use the
kind of a sales device. It's back to the marketing piece of, I mean, have you ever watched those commercials about how much deodorant you're supposed to use too? I mean, no, you don't need that much, even if you're using it regularly. It's like we're way too overdosing in our country. I mean, about selling product. So you don't need the curly cues on your toothbrush. You can put a little bit on it and have them not swallow it, because before they're 6, usually over 6, they're not going to. You can teach them to swish and spit. But it gives you other directions. It talks about fluoride toothpaste versus the fluoride varnish, and the risks of fluorosis, which is which can occur with fluoride injection during tooth and bone development, and the risks related to that is in children younger than 8 years, in the most susceptible period for permanent maxillary incisor fluorosis is between 15 and 30 months of age. Those are mostly kids that are not going to see a dentist. They are seeing a pediatrician or some kind of a child check. Everybody's busy in their practice. I just think this is interesting discussion, to be start thinking about, we should be indeed, as soon as your children have teeth, be thinking about dental caries and prevention. And some of what you can do, the protective factors are exposing the teeth to fluoride, limiting the frequency of carbohydrate consumption. I'm on page 627 at the top of the first column. Limiting the frequency of carbohydrate consumption, choosing less cariogenic foods, like Diet Coke that I just did down there. Practicing good oral hygiene, receiving regular dental care, and delaying bacterial colonization. If the carious lesions are identified early, the process can be halted or reversed by modifying the patient's individual risk and increasing protective factors. And it gives you some resources about some things that you can look up. I always find it really helpful to show parents pictures. So, so showing a parent how to teach a child how to brush their teeth. Otherwise, you don't think about it until they're in first grade. It's like, oh, you don't need to think about their first teeth. They're going to lose them all anyway. Well, if we take better care of them, we would have fewer health problems like that. So you won't be tested on this. At the bottom of page 627, there's a little table that says the fluoride modalities for low and high-risk patients. And again, the provider would need to establish some high caries risk, and that would include some of the things like probably their diet and probably some familial factors, but just the idea that poor, young, and minority populations, you have to evaluate that. So one of the things that I thought was interesting about it is that it talks about the public health measure of supporting fluoridation in the water, which if any of you cast your mind back to reading information about the 50s when we had started discussing fluoridation of water, it was perceived as a communist plot. So I don't think it still is, but yes, it is. Okay.
It's a plot. It's
But now
also,
the Chinese are selling this stuff.
you know, it's a U.S. government.
Anyway, so there you have some information about preventive care in pediatrics, and all of us working together, since we've got lots of other things to think about at the same time, but looking at decreasing dental caries in little people.
Great.
Peace sign. Tom, it's your turn. Respond. I've been waiting for this all day. Respond, please.
Well, I mean, it's clear that, fluoride prevents dental caries. I mean, there's just no question about that. It's also pretty clear that it's not a communist plot to get it into the water system. And as much as I appreciate the value of topical fluoride, there's also significant value of ingested fluoride. And people that are at greatest risk of not getting ingested fluoride are people that live in communities like ours that don't have fluoride in the water. Well-educated parents are likely to provide fluoride supplementation to their kids unless they, are communists. Anti-communist, I guess. Strongly against communist infiltration. But, the burden of dental caries is clearly carried by minority groups and core groups in our community. And so, it's not the young affluent parents that are seeing the pediatrician and are taking care of their kid with fluoride drops and topical fluoride. It's the poor people that don't have parents that are taking them to the pediatrician and aren't making sure that they get the right amount of toothpaste on the toothbrush, and also aren't adding the fluoride vitamins to the kids' intake. So I'm not repudiating anything you said here. I think it's fine that we keep it, at the forefront, but clearly it's a public health issue. Because a lot of people grow up with really bad teeth, and those are the people that can't afford the dentists.
And end up in the nursing home with bad teeth and
or they're socially stigmatized because they they have bad teeth, and that interferes with their ability to get jobs and everything else. So it's a way of segmenting our society, probably. We're not progressive in thinking about getting fluoride in, and we are affecting poor people of our communities.
And I personally would be very supportive of fluoridation in water, just because I think it is low risk and,
Sure.
And high yield.
Sort of a no-brainer.
But if I understand it right, though, our system, because we get it from so many wells, is not easily fluoridated, is that right, Ross?
I don't know the actual engineering of fluoridation. We currently chlorinate, and we chlorinated every wellhead. So, I mean, there would be a cost to it. I don't know the cost. I think as far as our water supply stance is on it, totally open to it.
For every dollar invested in fluoridation, you save $40 in dental caries treatment, so.
Right, and it would be a cost that the water rate commission, of course, have to bear. The Public Service Commission would have to approve those capital investments, which they certainly would.
It'd be interesting to know what the cost would be.
What this all, our discussion all comes back to is, too bad my students aren't here, because this all comes back to that whole upstream thinking thing about when we talked about, you know, stop pulling people out of the river, but somebody should go upstream and find out if we need to fix the fence, find out why they keep falling in. And putting fluoride in the water would fix the fence. And then we would have a lower rate, and then we could do with all of those things. But we have huge numbers of kids in our community that lack access to dental care, and by the time they see somebody, it's because they're having a tooth pulled, which is really kind of a sad commentary on that.
Is the time right for this group to approach that? I mean, once we get past the Ebola crisis?
I was,
Yeah.
the frozen
Once you
chickens.
solve that.
Oh, yeah.
Frozen chickens, yeah.
And the
It's
smell.
It's been some time since we had an ad hoc committee appointed by the chairman of the board to look at this. It's actually been quite a bit of time, but I still vividly remember how far we got and why we didn't get further.
Yeah, it seems like there was looked into.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, yeah, we
did
did.
this probably.
More than once, but I'm remembering the recent ones. We
Yeah,
had
that's, I'm
water at
thinking,
the
not
table.
a real long time, ago,
Brown.
like something in 20-ish years
Yeah.
ago.
It was probably 10 years, a little
So-
more than 10 years ago.
10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
This might not be
8
the
years ago.
best
Yeah.
time to talk about messing around with the city's water.
Oh, is that a sensitive issue?
Water in the city, you mean?
Who's
Well,
water
we
is
have a
it
lot of
anyway?
people who get their water from the
Yeah, right,
private
that's
wells
true.
Yeah.
down in the valley.
And there's a lot of people that will only drink bottled water. Those aren't, excuses that necessarily negate all the benefits. But in the communities, including those in Montana that have gotten all the way to the point of fluoridation, where they're usually a public municipally owned water supply, it's been voted down or stopped by a lawsuit, it's been the politics of getting past
Yeah.
it much more than
Oh, yeah.
the capital.
So-
The gains are
Immunization.
less for the larger population than they were in the 50s, but the gains can still be great for those most at risk and less likely to get the care that they needed. It's just how you want to weigh those. But we literally got to the point that I remember Hal Brown saying, I think in just the 2 years here we've discussed this, we could have had a whole crop of 2-year-olds perhaps fluoridated by some other fashion, something along those lines.
So there's an interesting statement in here that says rate of fluorosis among adolescents is up to 41%, and I'm sure it's very mild and location dependent. I was wondering what that would look like around here. Maybe it's 80% where there's fluoride in the water, I don't know.
Well, what it would
That's
look
a
like
high
if
number.
you had significant forms of it, if you read down a little farther, you'd see pitting and teeth.
Yeah.
Right, but, I guess you would want to avoid that.
Well, yeah, because it's sort
Or
of like,
minimize that and really depending on how much fluoride is available to adolescents around here now.
well, now, one of the things that's of interest to me is that, and it makes a comment in this article, soft drinks and juices that add fluoride do not counter, that doesn't counter the carcinogenic effects of the sugar in the drink. But people are starting to add fluoride to it. It's like, oh, this will protect you. Not if you wash it right away.
I said, think about feeding sugar to bacteria that just,
I mean, so if
It's
we're
kind of
not
like
gonna
eating
fluoridate
french
the
fries
water.
with Diet Coke, it doesn't work.
Yeah, we're not gonna, if we can't fluoridate the water yet, if we could just encourage what we're currently doing, which is drink more water, eat less sugar.
Yeah.
Don't go to bed with a bottle.
Yep.
Anyway, it was there and it was kind of fun.
Thank you.
Great. Do we have a volunteer for next month, November report? Thank you. Hey, then, next on the agenda is action to finalize and approve fiscal year 2015 work plan for implementing the three-year strategic plan.
Yes, so this is the third year of the three-year strategic plan.
It's a weighty document.
Right. What we tried to show you is both the trend for the overall indicator, the
Nice to have
dial.
highlighted in yellow.
The dial we're trying to move, which sometimes is a 10-year or 15-year dial, where we don't have a measurement for it. As well as we're also trying to show you whether we changed the objective in any way or created a whole new objective from last year. Because the goals are three-year goals. The objectives and the activities change depending on how long it takes to achieve them or if they obviously need to be changed because we're heading in the wrong direction.
So it looked like we met the goals, or we're improving on everything except the piece.
And we don't know, well, we do know if we count the only local measure that we have, which is our third grade BMI measure, we know that there's a tiny change now, but we can't yet say we've really moved the dial. We're in fact, as you've read this, going to expand the surveillance into older ages, and so that we can get more than just that snapshot.
Right.
But we're still, at every meeting, glad that we continue to get that particular measurement. But at the time we wrote this, we weren't ready to say, but what we can show you is the processes that are known to or believed to be changing that in the future have expanded greatly.
I have a couple more questions. On page 1, on breastfeeding number 1, this contacting mothers of newborn babies, is this for all mothers or just when you know?
We used to just go with first time, but now it's all mothers is what we're aiming for.
And on number 2, what is M-Spirit?
Oh, I'm sorry. That is the software that the state WIC program uses. And so that data goes into it, and sometimes we can get the data back. This appears to be one arena. We think we can get the data back and see what we're doing locally, because it is state level data once it goes in.
Okay. On page 2, number 4, 12 additional large to medium employers. What size is a large or medium employer?
I'm sorry, I'll have to get that for you. By one definition, it's 50 or more. That's a current federal definition, but I'm not sure which definition we're using.
Trying to think of how many large employers we have around.
Yeah. Yeah, there's mostly small. Yeah.
Well, if you think about banks and stuff, we're counting them all, we're counting them.
There's the small business definition, which is 25 or less. There's I'm just not sure which one we're using. But we have many already signed on and approved and participating among those smaller ones. I think that's why we're trying to reach out.
Staying with me. I have a question on page 6, number 1. Was this grant for the NFP services, is that done?
That,
You mean that they
yes.
applied?
That's the grant that brought us this year's funds.
I had a question about that too.
No, I have that wrong. Excuse me, that's last year's.
are we to surmise from that page that the funding for that program is in danger?
Not right now, but the legislature will meet again, and, you know, we did have to save it. So the legislature was rejecting that funding.
That's right. So we have to go through the same
Yes.
process.
Yeah, we have to write our grant. See, it's a 2-year grant. We had to rewrite it. That is done, though. So we're on the next round. And we've added some other types of programs, so let me think back, infrastructure. But we will. We are at great risk if the legislature does what it tried to do last time.
So you have applied by June 30th, 2014?
Yeah.
But the legislature is the one that approves the funding to go with it?
That would be the next go-around, for the next biennium. One of the problems, and I'm sorry this is confusing you too, one of the problems is the clarity with which I can direct staff and with which they can respond to show you how these things have changed over time. That's just really hard to do in this format. And we had some different uses and we had some wrong dates and we may not have cleaned them all up, but I think we have. We do have a regular NFP grant, and we have a grant to use the NFP, Nurse Family Partnership Program, a second grant that comes through the state. I have to tell you right now, I'm not sure which one Kate is referring to. We currently have both. We've currently reapplied and received both again, and I'm not sure when or if she just left this on, even though this was met.
My impression was that she left that in, as Ellen said, folks' ability to recognize how to report on what has been happening versus what they're expecting going forward has been challenging. But based on some information that Kate originally provided, my impression was that that was sort of looking back for Action 1, that she was looking back more toward what had been, but then she kind of moves in items 2 and 3 toward next steps.
So if we were all doing this consistently, which Julie tried to get us to be as consistent as she was able to get us, some of the things that we'd met, we would have just taken off.
So could we get some more clarity on that particular one?
Yeah, I can tell you what we have right now, though. We do have the federal money, and we do have the state money that's been put toward, it used to be the Miami money, it's been also put toward that particular model, NFP. We have both right now.
You know how much that is? And what the personnel is in the program?
I can get you for that, it's sizable, because we have supervisor and 2 nurses working on that, just on that program right now. Yeah. And then
Isn't
we
it
have
the one that we also work with some other counties on?
Yes, that is the one where Billings and Missoula serve as sort of the anchor agencies for 3 other counties.
So why don't we just have Kate give us an update next month?
Sure,
and then we
she'd
won't
be
have
glad to. We can make that the strategic plan update.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Mhm. Yep.
Also be good to be clear what we need to think about in terms of the legislature for
Yeah.
dealing with that.
It's work in the appropriations committee, basically full-time down to the last minute. That's basically what that's going to take.
It's also having somebody on the appropriations committee that's
Yeah.
a proponent of it.
We generally have to work, we have to get people outside our county, in
Yep.
addition to our county, to work the Republican members on that, because it doesn't, well, depending on how the election turns out and who the majority is.
Well, may have some, a physician that's interested in that, that's on the legislature.
We'll need that help.
Quite connected.
Good. I mean, it
Help
was.
me out with that.
We will, you won't escape.
Well, I think
It was
this is
one
an
vote.
incredibly important program.
Yeah, it was one vote at the last minute last time. It's a huge fight. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am?
Yes. Page 9. Second, objective 3, number 3, recruit at least one provider. And I just wanted to know, does that mean one doctor, one group, one insurance? or
I'm sorry, what page, are we still on page 6?
Page 9.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
Objective
that.
3, bullet 3. The prescription walking tours.
Oh, yeah, it's usually to try to get one healthcare provider, as we currently have with Dr. Vanetta, who promotes that.
So you could do the.
So right now, we have a
And then they-
doctor at the community hospital campus that provide, so this is to do one down, right? Okay.
So we have 2 doctors right now, one at community and one that's now at St. Pat's, that actively work on trying to make that program reach further into the prescribing community, physician and other prescriber community. We're just trying to get more. They're actively using it.
Pages.
Hmm? 9.
Which one?
Page 9, this is the prescription walking
Prescription
trails.
walking trail?
The idea is the doctors write the prescriptions to use the local walking trails. And so it's a good idea that we're actually trying to make happen and reach further.
And they do, community so far, but they haven't
Mhm.
established the trail along.
But St. Pat's is actively working with us to try to do it as well.
There was just a typo on page 15, objective 1. There's just, it starts out with an extra period.
Well, you get the red pen award today.
We just skipped the typo on page 12.
Did I? Let me see.
And footnote number 1, or objective number 2, US Census data, not date.
Yeah, I did. I must have.
They just jump out at me.
So the only way I can effectively proofread, no matter how many times I try, is to press send. And I immediately can just feel it, and then I read it, and there it is.
Yeah, I find the errors on my test when I put it in the photocopy machine and say copy
then it's-
500 times, and oh no, there it is.
So I had a question on page 3, just whether or not we need, I know we've talked about this in the past, but I don't know if it was something we should list in here about the fact that not all providers of immunizations, especially when the drugstores are getting into that, put the information into the database.
That's correct, they don't. The large primary care and pediatric providers in town, those clinics do. But
I
pharmacies
didn't know
don't.
whether it was an objective, it should be an objective, or if it's kind of like batting your head against a rock and we might as well not even write it down.
I think it should be a requirement. Certainly, I think it should be a requirement. Anyone who's not only giving immunization, but those that are getting vaccines for children, which the pharmacies aren't. But I don't know why we would give VFC vaccine or state purchase vaccine to someone who's not required to put that data back in the system.
So is that something that AMPO or somebody might
We've
draft
talked about it. The
legislation
state
for?
health department would have to say that they want, that they support and would advocate for that happening. I know Dr. Roberts and I have talked about it with different people. I most recently talked to a pharmacist who's in some fashion is the head of a group that's looking to work on their own immunization abilities again this session. And I did challenge him on that on a couple of fronts, and one of those was, you don't even put it in the register. I mean, this is just, not a public health approach, not a useful approach. And he said, well, we will when we're required to.
Okay, and And that can just be done by the health department, state health department? It doesn't
We
have
wouldn't
to
be able to accomplish it without the state health department supporting that. I think they should initiate it, but I'm not sure we want to wait
Would
for
you
that.
have to have legislation, you mean, or
Yeah.
could it be a rule?
Well, right now, the pharmacists are not allowed to give immunizations to people, to young folks, children. And their legislation that Ellen's referring to is some of the box stores around the country have found that it's pretty effective to get business by offering immunizations. So they're really the ones that are.
And they do them as a loss leader?
I don't know if it's a loss leader, is that?
Some of them even do them for free, but it's, yeah,
Yeah.
they wouldn't
Right.
do them under.
So they'll be pushing legislation this session.
To go further.
To allow that to happen. Yeah, we dealt with some of that last go around at the legislative level and basically agreed that pharmacists could give adult immunizations. So if they're tetanus shots, pneumovax, influenza, and zoster. Because it seems reasonable and you don't really need to track those as much. But we sort of drew the line at whooping cough, other than, and, any childhood immunizations. It's just so complicated. And so they're trying to push their ability to do that, not only to do it, but not even to put it into the registry.
Right.
So at least the MMA will be taking a pretty strong stand against that going forward.
Do they use the registry for their advantage to see what
Yeah.
immunizations are needed,
They
but then
can.
they won't
They
put it
can.
back in?
But they don't.
Yes, you can do read only.
I don't even know if they would use it, but they.
You just cart your kid in and say, I want shots?
Yeah, well, you say, I want
East End.
my shots. And, yeah,
You don't know,
give
they
it to
just
me.
But they
Unless
can,
we-
they can use it as
Yeah.
read only. They would be allowed to use it as read only.
Is there a board for the State Department of Health similar to
No.
Board of Health here?
No, the state health board was disbanded when the department was
Reorganized?
changed in 1995
1995.
legislature. Yes, there hasn't been a state board of
That
health
board used
since.
to be a joint board, so it'd have to be done legislatively,
Mhm.
as opposed to.
I
going
don't
to a-
think that
Need
there's
to
a,
require them to put it in?
No, to get the State Department to support.
Just
that.
had a board to get help with their policy decisions. They don't have a board anymore.
I don't
I mean, right
think-
now, it's a moot issue because they can't give the vaccinations, so you can't, requiring them to put in to the vaccination registry.
I was just
adult
talking about
vaccinations, I think has
Yeah.
minimal
Yeah.
benefit. Really what you're looking at is, have the kids had all their polio, chickenpox,
Right.
MMR, Hep A, Hep B, all those things that are quite complicated and most parents don't have a handle on. And additionally, there's, a significant number of parents that don't want to give them all on schedule and want to have, other complicated regimens. And so the whole morass is incredibly complicated, and throwing pharmacists in the middle of that with, willy-nilly vaccinations is just absolutely scary from anybody's standpoint, except, getting people into the store standpoint. I think, I don't know if I'm assuming the public health block in the state will be taking a strong stand on that, as well as the physicians.
right.
And so hopefully, we don't let that squeak through.
So I guess my question is whether or not we should, on page 3, under goal 1, objective 1, action 1, whether we should add a couple more. One might be as simple as monitor legislation, state legislation regarding childhood immunizations, and the other to work with DHHS to require those who provide immunizations to enter it into the database. I just think that if we have it there, it reminds us. We'll probably do it even if it's not written down.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have a better response for that. Part of what's gotten me stumbling a little bit here is trying to think through the timing of this plan, the next plan, and the legislature, and trying to figure out over time how your suggestion, where it lands. That's all. I think they're all fine ideas, and if you want to put them in there, it probably would, it's going to have to be.
This finishes in either the end of 2015 or mid-year, right? Because it's 2013, 2015
Yeah,
strategic
yeah.
plan.
Yeah.
So the legislature.
The next session
Before
It's-
the end of it.
It's simply, if we make it this department's strategic plan, there's some assumption that all the other legislative wherewithals, AMFO, MPHA, so on and so forth, would be willing to move in that direction.
But
They probably would, it's just a matter of can we do the leadership on that during a legislative session? At this point, I don't have the answer to that.
But just if the verb is monitor the state legislature.
Monitor, that one's easy, we can
Yeah.
put that in.
Yeah.
I mean, we will do that. But Jean, you had a second one that I thought took more initiative.
Right, and that's to work with the state health to try and require that. Because are all of them getting the same vaccine we're getting for the same price?
There are small practices that don't have vaccines for children because the red tape and the monitoring of that is just, it's huge. But the large practices are, of course, getting vaccines for children. Yeah. So if you want to put it in there, I think it's a starting point. It's a starting point to keep it in there and not lose it.
Well, if you don't want it to be a unmeetable one, you could say something like, support legislation that increases the number of vaccinations that are recorded in the registry.
Yeah.
You could just say, change the first one to say monitor legislation regarding childhood immunizations and entry of immunizations into the state database. Is it that IMAX?
Yeah, Amtrak's. Sorry, we've got a lot of those.
That way we can do both, right?
I think it needs to be a separate objective.
Okay.
I'm thinking of Sarah doing this in-house as opposed to what we need to do, whether we're successful or not, but to start moving our feet forward on a much larger front of initiative related to who's using it and who ought to be using it.
Right.
Not just how accurately we're using it. That first objective is how accurately we're using it. It's cleaning up our data. So I can look for the wording on that. They could possibly go together, but I think it needs to be a separate objective. Then if we meet it or we get pushed back during the legislative session or whatever, we can also, with it on the strategic plan, we could be more mindful of getting it onto the ample legislative plan, which hasn't been completely fleshed out yet.
So did you want to put it in a motion form?
I think we can
Amend?
put it in the.
Okay.
Yeah, an additional objective. And then I'll send you some language and see.
Yeah, and then when we make the motion to approve, it'll say
Yeah.
the addition.
Before we get off that subject, do you have any idea how many of the physicians that are giving the immunizations are actually using that?
I know that the large practices are using it. I can't tell you how many of the small practices are and are not, but I know that the very large practices, such as the one you're involved with, do use
I
it.
used to be involved.
Oh, yeah, right. We have to keep.
No, but I'm just wondering around the state, I mean. yes.
Oh, around the state, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't
There
know.
may be significant numbers of
Mhm.
people
Yeah,
that
and I
take their
think
kids that are not
trying to
using-
push an initiative like that, your first job would be to find out what the data tells us, not just what our sense of things is.
Yeah.
But how?
Because you've often said that sometimes our immunization rates aren't totally accurate because they aren't all in there.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And even what's in there, trying to write the community health assessment,
we finally called the state. It was friendly, but we've been reading the charts and figures and the charts and the figures and looking at it this way and that way and this way and that way. We're just going to pretend we're a reporter, and we want to know, what is the immunization rate for blah, blah, blah? And our friends there said, oh, we can get that. And okay. Comes back, oh, we have some work to do.
They were looking at the same
They
chart.
just kept sending us charts. We're like, no, we're not going to do it this way. You have to be able to tell us what our immunization rate is. So.
Right, and
Yeah.
you have to have a functional system. I mean, is Imtrex working well enough that we actually?
It really serves to carry the record for the family, the patient, and the provider who has to know where that particular patient is. That's its main function.
Yeah.
Other stuff, maybe it could do. I don't know that it's doing that yet very well. The population-based data and assessments you can get out of that are, again, not readily reported. So as I'm hearing this, it's a separate objective that has to do with promoting, knowing what the use is, of course, but promoting that use legislatively as a requirement.
Right, and then the other one's just making sure we're watching as big box stores decide they want to get into this business or safely.
Okay.
The next question that I'm not sure if it fits or not is page 11 regarding objective number 1. I just wondered whether there is or should be any reference to coordinating with our building code departments. I'm sure most of the building codes in the city would be connecting to city sewer rather than having a septic permit, but we're working on a new permit system, I know, at the county level, and it's really nice to know building permit number 27 has a permit for septic system.
So are you?
I'm just wondering whether we need any reference to a permit system.
So I just want to see what scenario you might be thinking of. So this has been a specific problem,
This is the Y sewer, right?
Right, which we all have the history on how we've contributed
Right,
to that
so I
for
guess it
existing. So are you thinking, and perhaps in the scenario, that a new building goes in, and that, we basically need to coordinate with ourselves here in this department if a new building goes in and they're looking for septic.
Right.
So I'm not against the idea of coordinating with the building department, but I think it's coordinating with ourselves.
I just wanted, I'm hoping that the new system that we put into place means that you can put in address X and it will pop up and say, those guys are looking at a building permit.
Okay, so you're.
Kind of a look both ways deal.
Okay, so we could add a clause on that.
The action could just be.
Or an action, right.
Coordinate with.
Okay. I get it now.
County.
Yeah.
Permit system or something.
Okay. And that'd be action item number 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because when we always look silly is when one department permits something that the other one
Right.
didn't know about.
Yep.
And that would be probably all.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I have.
Did you have something on page 15 I didn't get?
There's a typo.
What was
On
that?
objective 1, it's a period before
Oh,
the phrase starts.
Okay, thank you.
You didn't see it?
You must have other things to think about.
What are you saying?
If the shoe fits.
I always present radon data in my class, and I had a group of students in the class come up afterwards and decide that for a project, they were going to come down and buy some radon detection kits and test out the basements in a bunch of university buildings.
Huh, okay. That's right, North Corbin Hall.
Should I send some over? So I thought that was a great response. One of my students' fathers actually ran a radon remediation service and provided me with readings he'd seen in various communities. And some of those were pretty high, like 70s.
Wow.
Wow.
Whoa, yeah. In Florence and Victor and so forth, yeah.
Wow.
Maybe I should
They must
send
have
you the
some-
slide.
Must have some seriously tight windows in that house.
Right. I think it was that high.
Better sleep with the windows open.
Yeah, I've got it on my USB drive. No, I don't have my USB drive.
So
Are we
I
ready?
think this is an action item.
It is an
those
action item.
changes. Mhm.
Any comments from the public? Seeing none, any more discussion? And I would accept a motion to finalize and approve with the additions that we made to immunizations and sewer.
The why.
The why, right?
Mhm.
Looks like Debbie is making that motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Thank you.
Okay. We gave that a pretty thorough vetting.
Yeah. I'd like to get back to where we are doing this 2 months earlier, but
Right.
again, with our whole new process and system.
See, we already did
Slow.
number 4, which was the Ebola update.
Yes.
So we can go to director's report and accreditation update.
I will be going on a site visit for FAB and the accreditation site visitor lead. And that will be, which as you know is the culmination of the process for those of us that do the reviews. And that will be the second week of November, and I'll be returning, I think, just a day before the board meeting.
And where are you going?
That is, we are required to keep confidential.
I see.
Are you taking a swimming suit?
No.
Snow
It's not one of those places. I think we'll be busy from morning to night on the site visit, is my sense of it, so. Director's report, what else? We did have 3 awards bestowed upon 3 of our environmental health staff. I am sorry that I can't give you the names of the rewards right now because I forgot to bring that paper in. But they were given by the Montana Environmental Health Association. One was to Jim Carlson, and it was a very high-ranking award named after a gentleman that was an environmental health leader in the state years ago. The other, for some of our newer folks, I know you've run into Alicia Johnson and also Jeannie Miller. So that was good.
Great.
And we have the posting out, and actually the posting closed for the billing specialist lead. So we'll be reviewing those, I believe, starting next week.
Do you know how many applicants you've got?
I don't know the total number of applicants. I know that competition is going to be an issue for us, but it's not an overwhelming number. But there are qualified applicants.
Good. Pleased with the response? Are you pleased with the response?
I don't know the total number, but I just know that we have a pool, but I think it's a small pool.
But do you think it's a good pool?
I haven't looked at the applications. They're being screened by HR, and HR will only send over the ones that they believe meet the minimums, and I do not have those. So that's why what do I have?
We're
I
excited.
don't quite have that. Yes, I appreciate all the help in moving in that direction. And then our posting should go out very shortly, another attempt at hiring the nutrition manager. And we have changed the requirements on that. We were requiring a registered dietitian and a master's degree. That didn't pan out well in terms of fit, although we did have applicants, and we pursued them, I'd say, at length. So we're not requiring the RD, but a master's degree.
preferably in public health. That's all I have to report.
Okay. Any public comments for items not on the agenda for the Board of Health? Board or staff comments for the Board of Health? Then we will adjourn temporarily as the Board of Health and convene as the Air Pollution Control Board. We don't have any minutes there. I saw Ben peek in the door a couple of times. I don't see him right at the moment.
No, but I
want me to
can,
go get 'em?
yeah, and I can start to talk about it side by
Okay.
side.
Update on
As could you,
investigations
Garen.
into nuisance odors.
I can tell you that the fire that was smoldering and at times flaming at EcoCon, I'm on 1B, because I think it's shorter for this meeting. It's not shorter overall, it's shorter for this meeting, that the fire that was smoldering and flaming both at times at EcoCompost has been put out, and the pile that we believe shouldn't have been there to start with that helped create that has also been moved as a preventive measure, not only against fire, but against odor.
Moved across the field? or-
I don't know how they broke it up, but per Jim's or Ben's instructions. I could find that out if you have to know that, but all I know is we said it's not enough to put the fire out. We want the fuels moved, both for fire control and for odor control, and dealt with differently. I don't have any new news on the sewer plant, or if they've caught up on processing the solids that began to be piling up, I guess is the only word I can think of, starting in August. So when Ben comes in, he can maybe tell you if there's more updates there. On the north side, west side, we have met every week with the exception of this past Monday because it was a holiday. And going into that, I thought the group would kind of appreciate a little break from the that urgency of meeting, and we were making some progress. But I can tell you that just missing that one week where we had the direct communication has already caused some of the communication to kind of need to get gathered up. So I am looking forward to Monday's meeting. There was a field visit done while we were in our investigation, adding potential sources. I think in the last week we probably narrowed considerably, but not with full confirmation, but narrowed down to 2 potential sources. One is the odor was identified by those who have smelled it as being the odor over at Emerald, but it was faint to moderate, perhaps, in a very small area. Did not travel off-site on that date, but they did smell that. The other is the manholes for the sewer all around that area that serve the brewery over there, which is the Kettle House, have been plugged. And each week the city sewer's gone back and actually plugged the holes, and even more of those. And also, I think you guys are ready to discuss this further, so I'll quit with filling the airtime, and you guys can come up and talk about north side, west side, and Milton. Would you like to do that? All I mentioned, Jim, was the fire at Eco Compost is out, and the pile that was causing it was moved. Jean's had some questions about that, and then I moved to our latest on the north side.
Thank you. Yeah, we have not absolutely identified a highly concentrated source of odor in the area. However, on at least one field trip, we did identify the odor along with residents that people say they have been smelling, and it did smell very much like natural gas in and around the tanks, not in the tanks, around the tanks at Emerald Oil in their secondary containment unit. That secondary containment unit is quite old. I would guess that facility probably was an oil distribution location at one time. Missoula's past. Very rough concrete, uneven concrete. There's some substantial voids underneath the tanks, so certainly there's room for old oil. And the day we were there, it had rained recently, so if there's water and oil of it, there can be bacterial action that causes the generation of odors. That's not to say that the same thing can't be happening in the soil. But certainly I think it would be a good idea to make sure those voids were eliminated. It's hard, I think, for us to guess that that's the only source of that odor, since it's just the footprints underneath those dozen or so tanks that are probably 12 feet in diameter, I would guess, 10, 12 feet. We also have found out that at the last meeting that after just a few months after the sewer pipe downhill from or down gradient from Kettle House, and Kettle House it starts out on the very upper end manhole, that discharge, so there's nobody hardly else on that sewer pipe as it runs parallel to the railroad track until it gets down to the point where it crosses underneath. There is a substantial amount of yeast that had built up on the inside of the pipe because, of course, they're dumping large amounts of yeast from the brewing process into sewer. And yeast, we also have found out, has anywhere from 0.5 to 0.8% sulfur. Brewer's yeast does, so it's a high sulfur content organism that could also be a source. And of course, even though the manholes have been capped at ground level, every house has at least one vent. Many of them have 2 or 3, so the sewer can breathe, if you will, and have these spots of emissions.
And the guy who worked for the sewer plant described the smell as something that would choke a skunk. And I'm sure he's used to smelling some pretty ripe things. So I thought that was significant that
So
he
we-
described it in that manner.
We do have 2 sources and one identification of the smell, but as Jim said, the concentration, it's still not known how it can grow and shrink and emanate and not. So we'll be looking into and bringing water quality staff back in to do some of what
Right.
might be happening
Yeah.
underground.
In addition, there are some secondary containment structures that we have question about off to the east of where the main secondary containment is for the tanks, and that has to do with other materials like antifreeze, oil filters, and that sort of thing. There's an open outdoor sump that has been full of water twice. It's supposed to be a sump it's not a sump, it's a containment tank. And it's been full, so our water quality district staff is going to look at that and see if it actually meets the requirements of the city aquifer protection ordinance this Friday, tomorrow. And I think that pretty well covers our ideas about what the source may be. And of course, we've talked before about the possibility that there may be something going on in the vadose zone of the soil that could also be a source, because we know there's a considerable amount of sulfur in high pressure greases that are used on the railroad and also recycled at Emerald Oil. And so we have the chemistry available, and we did get the odor certainly from one source, but I don't think we're entirely convinced that That's the only source.
That's the full explanation, yeah.
We did try to schedule a cherry picker trip to the top of the tanks, but that fell through because of liability issues.
MRL didn't want it. They own the land that actually Emerald leases, and they didn't want the liability for putting, I guess, folks like me up in a cherry picker to look down and soil oil tanks.
Were we ever able to coordinate with Blue Marble with their sniffer machine, whatever they have that supposedly can detect what source is?
They've certainly indicated that they would make it and a technician available to us to use. However, its lower range of detection is at a part per million, and methyl mercaptans and these sorts of compounds can be smelled at as low as about a half a part per billion. So it's about 1,000 times less sensitive than the human nose as a ballpark. So the nose is a very sensitive organ, and the instruments that can measure these sorts of things.
It'll be
at
quite
least
ironic
using this
if in Missoula,
technology.
Montana, it has to do with making beer.
Well, we did have, the reason we were looking into that, we did have some odor complaints at Bayern and the sewer plant did some of this kind of work in that neighborhood, and those complaints have gone away, so.
So does it
I
mean
never
that they have to
smelled that.
dilute more before they discharge
They
or
have to
something?
rinse when they discharge, big time, and they may have to do some of their own power washing or pay the city to do it more frequently.
All of the
Yeah,
pipes?
of the pipes,
Or
yeah.
bypass.
Jim, don't they discharge into septic tanks for solid retention before the effluent goes into the
Yeah,
sewer
it goes
system?
into an oil interceptor, or it's actually a grease trap.
Okay.
But it's, yeah, pretty much like a septic tank, and so it does withhold those organics. So that's another question, if it would be better but of course, we're not sure that that's the source,
Sure.
but if it is, it might be better to bypass the tank and not have those organics sitting there aging, if you will.
Well, I just wondered if it was a maintenance issue on the tank that
Well,
discharged the solids into the
They've checked
system.
it, but they're pumping it as they're supposed to, based on the schedule of the sewer plant.
Just a reminder that although we're using some additional authority, we're getting great cooperation, first of all. The first time we've been said no to is, we really aren't going to dangle you over the, but,
Tanks.
yeah.
You're in a cage.
Right.
You don't feel bad.
But the local regulation that we're using, it's probably the only one like it left in the state. The state doesn't even have one anymore, and we're not hesitant to use it. But it only has certain reaches. So we have to keep that in mind and continue to get the cooperation that we're getting. But we can and are using, we believe, some of the authorities that we have and the expertise on water quality for those things that might be underground.
So what regulation is it that you're using?
It's air
Nuisance.
nuisance. It's just a
Nuisance
nuisance,
Right.
air nuisance. It's not really a direct health-related ordinance, it's air nuisance, air odor nuisance.
And that regulation is fairly unique.
Well, when it goes way back to when we had our own ordinances. They had to be at least as stringent as the state, and the state had one, but the state has since gotten rid of theirs.
It's becoming more unique.
I think it is.
So-
I think the state is essentially just done with investigating odors across the state.
Because it's too hard.
It's
But-
expensive.
Yeah, the other ordinance we were talking about was the Aquifer Protection Ordinance, which sets out some of the criteria. EPA also has them for storage and containment of some of the materials that they're recycling or sending off-site for disposal.
But neither of these have the reach that you might experience when you really, are looking at a cleanup of a full site and the investigation and the wherewithal of all that. These don't come near that. But we're using them, and we're actually relying on cooperation quite a bit.
So, will those entities then avoid a notice of violation?
We have not taken a notice of violation off the table. We're talking about it internally, but we're continuing to get actions that actually are mitigating. And we're also collecting some data that sometimes points away from those sources. So that's something we're actively discussing with Marnie, but in the meantime, we're moving forward with getting as much investigation and mitigation as we can.
Is that one of the motivations of these business owners, is to avoid a notice of violation?
I don't know, but they've been quite
That's-
cooperative.
that hasn't- they've
It
just
hasn't come up
been
with them. It's been internally.
Very cooperative, and our rules, our air pollution rules actually clearly state that, you know, there's nothing that prevents the department from seeking voluntary cooperation
And they have all-
as an alternative to mandatory cooperation.
So we're not threatening with it, but we do have, we have conversations. Are we at a point we should use it? Why? And so on and so forth.
And those are fairly open, transparent conversations.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And on one final note, we haven't received an odor complaint since the 29th of September.
Just be the weather.
Yep.
If it continues that there are less complaints during cold weather, that might argue for a bacterial component too.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, there's the pressure volume sorts of relationships that also happen in hot weather as sun hits partially empty tanks and
vapor pressure
causes
curves.
evaporation. So there's both
Temperature drives a number of
situations
things.
tend to say that cooler weather is better for things that are smelly.
Yep.
Skunk quits riding so much.
Skunk that choke on the
Any other questions for Jim or Ben or Sarah, since they're here as well?
It's a great detective story. I can't wait to get to the conclusion.
Right.
It is intriguing, although tiring for all who have to smell it.
Could be a series program on TV.
Odor hunters.
Reality.
Yeah.
A lot of channels on there.
Okay.
Reality show.
Yeah, that's
Big franchise
interesting.
that,
Yeah.
get a little extra funding for the
Just when you
mental
think
health,
you've, seen it all, you get the frozen chicken truck.
I know.
Right.
Yeah, the chicken truck.
I know, or the
Further
defrosting
adventures.
chicken truck.
Yeah.
How you doing?
But then Bob Wire had to drive that song that I can't get out.
I know, I'm stuck with it too, about the chickens.
Get it to country.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any public comments for items not on the agenda? How about board and staff comments?
We might point out that the agenda was actually revised in 2014.
Oh,
Instead of
sorry.
16?
Yes, sorry about that. No, thinking ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah. I think it was, since our last meeting,
It's forward looking. We're supposed to be talking about the north side, west side odors on 16. I hope not.
I think that was October 15/16. I think we had the,
That's why I'm so tired.
the visit from the electric bus.
Yes, I went to the bus. You
Yeah,
went to
so
the bus?
it was interesting writing on that. How many got to?
I got to ride on the bus.
Oh,
Yeah,
on the bus.
yeah, on the electric bus.
Sounds like it's not.
The only
going
noises
anywhere.
were the tire noises, so that was interesting. I did have one of my students who drives one of the ASUM buses forward me a story from a community in South Carolina that's been having trouble getting delivery on their buses from that company and having the recharging not working quite as well as they would like it to.
So So the other thing is apparently we're going to have a place to plug in your Tesla car in Missoula, a charging.
I can't wait till I get my Tesla car. I can plug it in.
But it doesn't have to be a Tesla, can it be one of the
I
other?
don't know, it's
A
just-
Leaf. Yeah.
When will it be
Well, I think
delivered?
Nissan, Hyundai already has a charging station, because they sell those Nissan Leafs.
Are they Leafs, right?
Leaves.
Well, I was.
They multiple.
Leaves.
Exactly, more than one leaf goes in there.
Okay, with that, then I think I will go ahead and adjourn the Air Pollution Control Board meeting. We'll reconvene in closed session as the Board of Health.